James Burns is now 14 years old and just got parole after serving time in a children's prison. He is still under the supervision of the court, so James still uses a detector on his leg. James' mother, Tracy, wants her son to be able to go back to school and enrolled him in the nearest high school. Unfortunately, the school refused him because James had too many criminal records. Plus, in one of the cases, James had committed robbery and assault which endangered someone's life. Tracy was very disappointed, even though James had done a psychological test which stated that he could return to school. Even so, the school remained in its decision and suggested that James enrolls in another school. James feels very disappointed and fed up with the environment around him, which seems not to accept him. Even though he is free, he has maintained his behavior and remains at home. As a good mother, Tracy tries to calm him down and give hope that later, there must be another school that will accept James. The most important thing now is that James has to be even more patient and keep up his behavior. While waiting for his mother to find a school that wants to accept him, James just spends his time at home. Apart from not having friends, the detector on his feet is also a major problem that makes him couldn't wander too far. One night, James ran out of milk and had to go to the nearest mart to buy it. James had to be back before 8 o'clock or else the detectors on his feet would send an alarm to the bailiff. While shopping, unexpectedly James is involved in theft committed by pranksters. Instead of avoiding it, James actually felt happy and went with them. The two children are named Crystal and Manny. The three of them then hung out until 8 o'clock while enjoying the city atmosphere and rolling marijuana leaves. Their meeting then continued to the next day. James was invited to go to Cynthia's house, Crystal's new friend. Because there was no Kinch's parents, Crystal go around and messing with the house, including drinking the expensive liquor. It doesn't stop there. Crystal and Manny also openly rob Cynthia's parents' jewelry and Cynthia herself. Because she is a quiet person and is too afraid, she just gives up looking at her new friends act at will. From Cynthia's house, the three of them came back hanging out and Crystal mentioned Rock, who would like James if only he didn't have detectors on his feet. Manny explained that Rock was a drug dealer who ruled the area, while they both worked as couriers for him. Later, when he got home, James forgot to throw away the drink bottle that was kept in his jacket and the bottle was found by his mother. Tracy was very angry and disappointed because all this time, she had tried her best so that James would avoid problems and be able to live normally like other children. James himself was also angry because he believed there will be no more schools that want to accept him. Besides, the environment will also look at him with one eye. James is tired of doing good, because in reality his criminal record will stick in his life. James was tired of all the boring routines, and this time he wanted to do whatever he pleased. Finally, with a heavy heart, Tracy let James go. This is the beginning of James' dark life. He was desperate, so he cut the detector on his leg and went to Rock's quarters, which had previously been told by Crystal and Manny. Bravely, James immediately asked for a job and admitted that if he had courage. James was very confident that he could be relied on more than Rock's other men. Then, Rock tested James by pointing a gun and of course, James didn't react at all. The next day, James called home and said to his mother that he would not come home. Of course Tracy felt worried and intended to pick him up, but James refused and quickly hung up the phone. That night, James was given the task to take Rock and Manny to pick up things at someone's house. James doesn't know what the stuff is and he was only told to wait and get ready at the wheel. After Rock and Manny entered the house, a few minutes later, a man was seen coming and running in through the back door. James was immediately suspicious and when he approached, it turned out that there was a noise inside. Without thinking, James slipped through the back door and took a Teflon. When he entered the living room, James saw Rock and Manny being held up so they couldn't do anything. James immediately hit the man with the Teflon, so Rock had the opportunity to strike back. After taking the bag which consists of drugs, Rock celebrates it by holding a party in a bar. James received praise for his bravery, even Rock gave quite a lot of money to him. After his action, James was officially accepted and allowed to live with Rock. Crystal also seemed to be getting more interested in James and their relationship was getting closer and even they often slept together. With praise and recognition from Rock made James feel arrogant and he likes to act as he pleases. When delivering goods, James drove a car at high speed and of course that could attract the attention of the police and in the end, they were caught carrying drugs. Crystal didn't want James' arrogance to be a disaster. But James didn't care, and he was very confident no one would be able to stop his actions. So, that's James' routine. He's waiting for orders from Rock to deliver goods or accompany him when he goes to solve problems. Rock then tells one of James' actions that most impresses him. it was when James Rack's a drug dealer. Rock is very proud and wants all his men to imitate James. Because Rock trusted him, James then asked for one or several areas to be handled by himself. But this time, Rock refused and said that the time was not right. Rock wanted James to continue carrying out his duties as usual, and in the future, Rock promised to provide several areas that James could take care of himself. One day, James was given the task of collecting money for selling drugs from one of the bar owners. With his friend, Draw, James came in and immediately asked for the money. Unfortunately, the bar owner refused because James was considered a kid who just wanted to play robbery. Feeling humiliated, James became angry and pointed a gun. In fact, he also bluffed by shooting a bullet. That's when two people came in unexpectedly. James should be grateful for just being beaten, but he vented his anger by destroying the bar owner's car. At that time, James saw a bag full of weapons, so he initiated to take the bag in exchange for paying for the drugs. When he got home, James told Crystal about his action. But instead of being proud, Crystal was actually disappointed because according to her, this action would only cause bigger problems. Crystal wanted James to become a mature man like Rock, who was able to think clearly. If James still put his pride first or was easily provoked, so Crystal was sure that James couldn't be as big as Rock. Then, an argument ensued. James couldn't accept being called childish, and Crystal was also increasingly disappointed because James said that Crystal is a useless woman who always responds to every man who approaches her. It turned out that all this time, James had heard that Crystal had slept with Rock and also several men she met at the bar. Then, Rock came and he was furious. According to him, selling weapons was more difficult than selling drugs. Apart from that, Rock's relationship with the bar owner was also destroyed, even though that person was one of his longtime customers. Rock was very emotional and asked James to sell the stolen guns himself. James then went to the supermarket to buy a drink while calming down. But his emotions were provoked again when one of the refrigerators there was locked and James could not take the drink he wanted. The shopkeeper, Sarah, was scared. So James, who saw it, felt sorry and relieved his emotions. The two of them then got acquainted, and Sarah did not expect that James, whom she knew was a drug dealer, could actually be kind. They then tell each other stories, and Sarah told James that she had to work in between school hours because her father was unemployed. From their first meeting, James felt comfortable with Sarah. So, after the meeting that night, James often met Sarah just to tell stories and chat together. James had revealed that he actually just wanted to live a normal life and be accepted by other people. James really missed his teenage life and wanted to live a day like other children. Apparently, Sarah's response was unexpected. Sarah didn't mind James' past, she even encouraged James to change his life immediately. They seemed to like each other, especially James, who now can find someone who really cares about him and wants to accept what he is. Meanwhile, at the same time, the lonely Crystal finally fell into Rock's arms and they spent the night together. On the other hand, James feels as if he had a new chance in his life, plus it turned out that Sarah's friends were also very open and accepted James' presence. They played basketball together and Sarah's friends were all very happy when James played with them. James was able to feel the pleasure that had been lost all this time, and he was also very grateful to have Sarah, who cared for him. Unfortunately, this happiness did not last long, because Rock returned and asked for James' responsibility for selling the weapons he had stolen. Rock had already found a buyer and he asked James to go to the place that had been determined. Initially, James refused, with the reason that he wanted to live in peace. But Rock provoked his emotions by calling James a coward and ungrateful. And maybe James ended up being a bum if in the past, Rock didn't give him a job. Finally, James agreed to Rock's request with a note that this is the last time. In the transaction, James and Drew came to the location using Rock's car. As usual, the transaction started with James showing his weapons. But when James asked for the money, they attacked and immediately tried to escape. Not wanting to lose, James counterattacked and James' shots succeeded to make their car crash the roadblock. Unfortunately, James failed to take his weapon back, because suddenly a police siren was heard and the sound was getting closer and closer. Near Rock's house, there were already a lot of police and they secured Rock and Crystal. James immediately ran to meet Sarah and asked her to flee to another city. Of course, Sarah refused it. Sarah didn't want to leave her life, especially because her parents still needed her presence. Sarah was forced to refuse and let James go and leave her. James, who's confused, chose to go back home, and at that time, his mom isn't home. James wanted to see his sister and his mother, but unfortunately, he didn't have time because the police came in a hurry and immediately arrested him. James was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but most of his time was spent in juvenile prison. Only after he was 18 years old, James was transferred to a public prison led by Lieutenant Felton. In just 4 months, James with his courage was able to form his own support, and in that prison James also had a rival named Guillermo. These two gangs were very sensitive and often got into trouble. For example, when a new convict, Chris, tried to be annoyed by Guillermo, James came. It is not because James pity, but he deliberately just wants to make a fuss. The guards, who were on duty, immediately got ready because they knew that when the two gangs met, there must have been a commotion in the end. And sure enough, soon the commotion continued. When the prisoners were bathing, Guillermo intended to stab James. But luckily, Chris realized and immediately told James. Again, there was another commotion, and at that time, Guillermo's friend took the fallen knife and he then stabbed Chris. Shortly thereafter, the police arrived and James was summoned to be questioned who owned the knife that was used to stab Chris until he was critical. Even though James knew that the knife belonged to Guillermo, he did not answer, on the grounds that he was not a complainant. For not giving any information, James is put in a rat cell, and after many days there, James is transferred to another cell adjoining a life inmate named Conrad. One night, James woke up and asked Conrad for a book, but Conrad refused and simply ignored James. When James gathered in the field with his friends, he asked his friends who Conrad was. His friends explained that Conrad was a prisoner who had killed 5 people outside and 2 people in prison. Felt curious, James then tried to approach him by asking the book he was reading. Even though Conrad looked ignorant, he answered James' questions. Then, James continued the conversation by saying that he planned to attack Guillermo. Conrad responded to it with a smile, while reminding James that his action would only make James regret it later. One day, James' mother came to visit and Tracy told lots of stories about her busy life, including the news that James' sister really missed him. Tracy reminded James to change his attitude so that when there was an examination hearing, James could get remission and might be free at Christmas. After his mother visited him, James often daydreamed and recalled his mistakes. He began to feel regret and he poured all his feelings into a piece of paper. James also wrote a lot of poetry about his life story. Conrad, who read it, was very supportive so that James would continue writing. Every night, James continued to write words, and Conrad, who heard it, also felt sure that James had a good side that not everyone knew about. After his health recovered, Chris returned and James immediately apologized for getting him involved in fighting. Chris then told James that every week, his mother always came and she made Chris survive until now. James then suggested that Chris should stay away from problems, so that at the examination hearing later, Chris could get remission or maybe he could be released. But unfortunately, Chris' desire to be free had to be postponed because before the trial was held, Chris was attacked by Guillermo. So, when the examination hearing was carried out, Chris came with a battered face. Finally, Chris was added 6 years to his sentence, and this decision immediately frustrated Chris. When all the convicts were sent out to exercise, Chris suddenly tied a rope he made from a pillowcase and the blanket. Saw that Chris was about to kill himself. Most of the convicts there immediately shouted for Chris to jump immediately. The officers started to panic, including James, who kept shouting for Chris to discourage him. James feels guilty again and he becomes irritable, even though tomorrow is the day of his hearing. Conrad also reminded James to watch his behavior, because who knows, tomorrow he will get a remission. Conrad also said that in this prison, everything can happen, and he also saw a delinquent who got free, and there was also someone who had good behavior but was not released. Conrad tried to make James realize that he still has the opportunity to get a better life out there. All this time, James is consumed by his pride, so he does things that make him feel better. In reality, what James does is like a kid who wants to be respected. James listened carefully to Conrad's words and faced his trial in a different way. He tried to express his feelings about his fears and worries for life. He also gave the jury all the writings that exposed all his crimes so far. James was very sorry, but even so, he didn't expect to be released. It didn't matter if the jury wanted to add his sentence, James was humbly ready to bear all the punishment and risks for his crimes. It turned out that all of James' confessions and words made the judges believe and gave freedom to James. His sister and mother immediately picked him up. And it was as his mother had hoped for. The 3 of them can gather and celebrate Christmas together happily. A few weeks later, James tried to live straight by working at a game center. His salary was far less than his previous income when he joined Rock. While some of his friends come and offer James to join again in the drug business. At first, James refused it, but because he felt that he was often belittled there, James took part as a courier for one time only. Because after that, James intended to go out of town and get away from all his past. Before delivering the drugs, James took time to meet Sarah, who turned out to be engaged. Even though he was a little disappointed, James was happy because Sarah was able to move on with her life and get someone who can make her happy. They both tell each other without burden and can make peace with all the past that James has gone through. James also read a poem written while he was in prison, and Sarah was very proud and sure that James' life would be much better. After that meeting, that night, James made a transaction, then took his share. The next day, James was accompanied by his mother to move to New York. There, James started his life again from zero, and he worked in an office with a mediocre salary. Until 2014, James still lived in New York and studied at Manhattan Community College, majoring in writing and poetry.